Welcome back to another episode of the Conviction Fiction Podcast, where we unpack the patterns, the mindsets, and the hidden emotions that have shaped our lives, especially the parts we don't always want to look at. No fluff, no filter, just straight up rebuilding your life from the inside out. Now, today we're dealing with something real, something we all know too well, and that's fear. Now, not just fear itself, but the fear of fear. That moment when you feel something rise up in your chest, and instead of naming it, you push it down. You try to cover it up with anger. You hide it behind like bravado. You drown it in busyness. You pretend it ain't there. But here's the thing I learned the hard way: denying fear doesn't make it disappear. It just drives it deeper into your decisions, into your reactions, and into your life. So today's episode, we're pulling back the curtain on the fear we run from, even while it's still running our lives. This is the Conviction Fiction. All right, welcome back to the Conviction Fiction. I'm your host, Antoine Rivers, and we're just going to sit with this idea of fear for a minute because it's deeper than what most people realize. It's not just being scared, or if it were that simple, just being scared, most of us could handle it. We've dealt with real fear before, like fear in your hood, fear in your neighborhoods, where anything could pop off at any moment, fear in sales, where you had no control, fear of losing people, losing opportunities, losing yourself. We all know what fear means. But the fear of fear, it isn't about the thing itself. It's about the experience of feeling afraid. It's about the experience of feeling afraid. Now, that's a different level of survival mode here. You see, denying fear becomes a reflex. It's like it's almost automatic, built from years of being told that fear equals weakness, being told that if you even look scared, somebody's going to try you, right? How many can relate to that? That if you show hesitation, people will take advantage of it. It's all about confidence. Now, a lot of us grew up in homes and schools and neighborhoods, and yes, even in prison. A lot of us grew up in prison where the rule was pretty much simple: don't let them see you sweat, right? Don't let them see you sweat. So eventually, you stop sweating on the outside. You learn how to hide fear so well that you even convince yourself it wasn't there. But here's the kicker: when you don't acknowledge fear, it doesn't die. It pretty much grows a life of its own. It starts to grow influence on you. It starts steering your decisions from the inside. So you think you're calm, but really you're pretty much numb. You think you're tough, and you think you're not worried about it. Um, no, pretty much, player, you're avoiding the very thing that could elevate you. Fear becomes that quiet, like puppet master, controlling your reactions. And here's the thing: most people don't say out loud. Avoiding fear, we kind of feel safe. It's familiar. It's almost like protection around you. Because if you don't try, you can't fail. If you don't apply for a job or apply for a position or try to move up, you won't get rejected. But they say you can only what's the one about shooting your shot? You know, you're gonna miss every shot you don't take, or something like that. If you don't get close, you won't get hurt. If you don't speak up, nobody can shut you down, right? 100% of the shots that opportunities we don't take because of fear. We call it being selective. Sometimes I've seen people say, "Well, I'm just moving smart, man. Playing it cool. I'm not interested in that right now." But underneath all that smooth talk is fear, right? Fear of being embarrassed or not measuring up. Fear of discovering that the version of you that you've been selling to the world might crack under pressure. You're going to lose control or have feelings of or emotions that you work really, really hard your entire life to bury. So We can dress that fear up and design excuses all we want. We can pretend we don't care, that we're above it, like the opportunity isn't really right. I'm not going to apply for that job because, I'm just going to wait. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to talk to that girl because I don't have on the right clothes right now. You know what I mean? I catch you later. We pretend we're too busy or that we're too focused on other things in order to go after an opportunity that could take us to the next level. But deep down, the truth is simple. It's easier to deny fear than to face the mirror that shows it. Because fear becomes a habit, man. It's like muscle memory. It's a script that we learn from environments that pretty much punished vulnerability, right? We grew up in places where, or we went through places where if you showed fear, that was a punishable act, you know? Um, you better not act like you scared. You better hold your chest out. If someone hits you, you better hit them back twice as hard. Because if I find out about it, I'm going to get you, right? And this is the lie that we keep telling ourselves over and over again. It's that we don't acknowledge the fear that we're pretty much in control. But real control doesn't come from hiding fear, guys. Real control comes from naming fear, professing it, saying it out loud, even if it's just to yourself. Yeah, I'm scared, but I'm still going to move. When you name fear, you strip it of its camouflage. You take away the ability to manipulate your reactions. You take your power back. And that's what this episode is about breaking that cycle, about saying, I'm not going to keep pretending that I don't feel fear. I'm going to recognize it, understand it, and use it as information, not something that's going to intimidate me. Because once you do that, the lies start to crumble, all those excuses that you have, they start to fade, and fear becomes manageable. Not because it disappears, but because you finally show up to the fight. You finally show up to the fight. And here's the thing, what are we so afraid of? What are we hiding behind anger, right? This is something that people don't really like talking about. Not in prison, not in the streets, not at home, not in relationships, not even in therapy, unless someone drags it out of them. Anger is one of the greatest disguises fear has ever worn. A lot of us didn't grow up in environments where fear was allowed any space at the table. Fear wasn't something you expressed. It was basically something you buried. You got to get over that. You better pull up your bootstraps. You that guy put on his pants the same way you do, one leg at a time. Fear was something that you strangled before anybody could even see it. You just like, let me get that out of my head. I'm gonna avoid it, right? I'm gonna replace it with toughness and attitude, aggression. And more often than not, one of the tactics I used was quick reactions. As soon as fear showed itself, I would quickly react. Now, the decision to react, whatever decision I made or that reaction, it could have been good, it could have been bad. Might have been, I don't know, pulling a pistol, right? It might have been slapping the shit out of somebody, right? And that's the thing. I can remember I should have saved this for story time Saturday. But that's neither here nor there, right? That's neither here. That's something that we're doing on. If you follow the Conviction Fiction podcast, we got our little social media team. We started a weekly or daily session. You got your storytelling Saturdays, your self-worth Sunday. So check it out. If you aren't following, go ahead and follow, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But when we're talking about fear and my quick reactions, one of the things that I used to do, I can remember this vividly. I had just got locked up. I was sitting in a holding cell, but then eventually I moved over to the county. Well, anyway, I was in jail, right? So I'm in jail, and they were playing. It was a card game going on, and we were playing poker with card games, and we were basically playing for the soups, the chips, the cigarettes, all this good stuff, the coffee, right? Coffee. We were gambling, right? So now, I kind of took on affinity of gambling, playing cards, shooting dice whenever we got them, I was, I kind of grew up doing that stuff. I know y'all look at me like, dang, he works for this, that, and the other, and yeah. But that's the old me. That's the new me, right? The old me was kind of, but anyway. The story goes, I ended up going to a big camp, and I had just got there. This was my first time in the big camp, and got into a card game. I knew someone that I did time with. We kind of linked back. I was like, man, they playing cards. I know you like to gamble and stuff like that. So I went over there, and since I'm just getting here, I might have lost all my money, guys. I'm just gonna tell you, I probably lost all of it. But for some reason or another, I felt that the guy next to me had stole my chips. Not like potato chips or your Cheetos. I'm talking about my like poker chips that we had made up. Like how we are resourceful when it comes to doing so. So we had poker chips, and it seemed like my poker chips were like really dwindling. And I was like, okay, I know I had sat them here. Did I look away? He just looked like he crafty. You know what I'm saying? He just looked like he sneaky as shit. And since I'm here, I needed to make a reputation for myself. And I was like, I asked him, I said, hey, bro, did would you stole my chips, didn't you? And it was basically fear that I had lost my shit and I didn't even know. I didn't know that I had gambled all my money away or all my little chips away. But at that moment, I felt fear. I was like, I got here. I need to let them know that I'm serious about this gambling game, that I'm doing this, that, and the other. And this is the perfect opportunity. Wham! Just wham, right into dude jaw. And we tussling, we going at it, boom, boom, boom. And he was a little bit, I was hitting the waist, but he was a little bit bigger than me. But it was a statement. It was one of those quick reactions that I had straight out of fear of being looked at as somebody that you can take some from. Right? I had learned to meet fear the same way I met disrespect, and that was with force. That's how many of us really survive. But here's the truth. Most of our anger isn't anger. It's just fear leaking out the side door. Think about the times you snapped on somebody. Was it really about what they said, or did what they say hit a nerve? A nerve that's probably attached to a fear that you never really addressed. And that's what we talk about on this podcast. We talk about those underlying issues that kind of direct the emotion that we have. Think about the times you got irritated or defensive. Was it really because of the situation? Or did the situation make you feel small? Maybe it makes you feel unseen or vulnerable in a way that you really couldn't just outwardly admit it. Because one thing about fear is that it hides behind anger. Because anger kind of gives us a sense of power. It makes us feel like we're in control, right? Like no matter what, I'm able to push people back, right, with this anger, while fear is pulling us inwardly. So instead of saying, I feel insecure, we say, no, I'm good. I'm good. Instead of saying, what we always say, or what we always feel, man, I feel really overwhelmed right now. You know what I'm saying? We say, hey, man, back up off me, bro. Just back up off me. I feel you too close. Back up off me. Instead of saying stuff like, well, I really don't know what I'm doing. We'll choose to say, just out of bravado, just out of anger, like, don't tell me how to live my life, because you're trying to help me. You don't tell me how to live my life. You go live your life. What's the old thing? Like, what you eat don't make me shit. Instead of just saying or outwardly admitting, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing right now. I'm just winging it. Anger is the mask. Fear is the face behind that mask. So let me tell you from my own life, times when my anger wasn't really angry at all. It was fear that I didn't have the language for yet. You see, I spent that, it was, I just didn't have the language for it. It's that fear that I disappoint people counting on me, or fear that I fall back into old patterns if I didn't stay in control. Yeah, so I most times lashed out in anger, because there were moments where somebody could ask me a simple question. A simple question. It don't matter what the question. It could be very simple, but I swear they were challenging me. There were moments where opportunities came up, and instead of leaning in and trying to figure out the opportunity and how it can benefit me or do what I need to do to make this opportunity fulfill itself, I would fight them with attitude. While I was trying to really protect myself from being hurt, but ended up hurting others instead. And why did I do that? Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why do we end up hurting others just because? Because fear feels like weakness. And a lot of us are allergic to even the idea of weakness. The fear of looking soft or unsure, sometimes it's just a fear of being misunderstood or failing in front of everybody. Man, that's the worst thing you can do, man. We get taught this at a young age, right? Back home in Atlanta, we called it joning. You know what I'm saying? If somebody joan you too hard, then if you ain't got you can't joan them back, then that insecurity and shit kick in and people start laughing at you. So now you ready to fire his ass up. You ready to fire whoever joning you up, right? And instead of saying like, hey, you got me, bro, you're really making me feel bad, about myself. You talked about my shoes. You talked about my crooked teeth. You talked about like why I ain't got no haircut. You talked about my clothes. Guess what? You can't beat me fighting though. You can't beat me fighting. So instead of saying that, well, I feel bad, we erupt. We start talking loud, we posture, we begin to dominate. And eventually we shut down and create distance because that distance feels safer than this dishonesty, right? But let me flip it for a second. What if anger isn't strength at all? What if the strongest people are the ones who can actually say that I'm scared, not in a dramatic way, not in a helpless way, but just in an honest way? Because when you call fear for what it is, anger really no longer has to stand guard or have power. Think about those situations where anger caused you to miss out, right? Just think about it. Opportunities that you walked away from, friendships that you walked away from, or relationships you damaged because of anger. Jobs you may have lost, the list goes on and on. Just chances to grow that you shut down because of anger, which was actually fear. Because when you replay those moments, you need to also ask yourself, what were you really afraid of? What were you really afraid of? A lot of us are afraid of being exposed, afraid that the world will discover, a word that most of us avoid at all, called insecurities. Those insecurities that we've been hiding behind the whole time. We don't want to be exposed for that. We don't want to be exposed to, say, back going to the joning incidents and stuff like that. We don't want to be exposed to like, okay, you broke. Your family broke. You broke. You can't get good clothes. You can't get good shoes. You can't even get a good dentist. We're afraid that someone will see the cracks in our armor. But guess what? Everybody got cracks. Everybody has moments of fear. Everybody has something that they are protecting. You're not alone in that. You're just unpracticed in admitting it. And it's not your fault. It's not my fault. A lot of us weren't raised in emotional safety. We were raised in emotional survival. But now that we're here on the outside in the world that we're trying to rebuild, emotional survival isn't enough. We need more emotional honesty. We need emotional leadership. We need emotional accountability. So if you were to ask yourself right now, because this is what the heart of this episode is about, what fear are you hiding behind your anger? And if it is, what fear It's dictating your reactions before you even think about it. Because until you answer those questions, anger will keep sitting in the driver's seat while fear holds the map, and it's only going to lead you to more heartache. So, um, in researching this episode, I was like, I need to have a character. I get tired of talking about me, because I did make mistakes, but let's just go third person here because a lot of us are are more quickly to learn if we had an example. I'm not a perfect example. Let's talk about I don't know. Let's make up one. Let's talk about Kevin because Kevin is just not. He's not just Kevin. He's all of us at some point in our life. He represents that moment where fear steps into the middle of your opportunity and says, "Hey, not today, buddy. You're not going to get this today, buddy." And instead of challenging it, we let the fear dress itself up as confidence, as indifference, like I don't care, it's cool, I ain't want it anyway. Right. So here's one scenario. Here's one scenario for Kevin. Kevin gets invited to a job interview, a real opportunity, right? Something that could shift his whole life, something stable, respectable, something he told himself he wanted for years. But right before the interview that night, fear starts to creep in, starts to whisper in his ear. It starts to creep in. Man, you're gonna look stupid. You're not even qualified. They're gonna judge you, bro. You've been out the game too long. What if they ask you something you can't answer? What if they realize who you used to be, or they find out about your felony? Or that time you what if you fail? And I'm saying that, bringing it back because fear doesn't always show up loud. Sometimes it shows up subtle, calm, logical, even gentle. It whispers like it's trying to protect you. And you don't even need to go to that job interview. Fast forward. By the next morning, Kevin convinces himself that he's made a smart decision not to go. He tells himself that the job isn't really his style. Now, yeah, they don't even pay enough, man. The hours don't fit my schedule. Then it's way across town, man. It's too long. I ain't finna be driving all the way over there. I ain't got no gas like that. The vibe just felt off. And then you got to dress up, put on a suit to go to the interview. Man, it's just too much. Right? I'm just really waiting on a better opportunity anyway. And that's what fear does. It turns avoidance into basically like a salesman, right? It turns you start to believe what the fear is trying to get you to believe. It turns your insecurity into fake wisdom. It turns your insecurity into fake wisdom. Another thing, it also turns, right, that fear of failure, like you don't want to fail or you don't want to look like you failing, it turns into a fake confidence. You're like, I ain't even want that job anyway. That job ain't good enough for me. So Kevin ended up canceling the interview. A lot of y'all didn't cancel the interview, but everyone around you, you played it cool. Like, nah, man, that wasn't for me, man. I'm good. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The truth Kevin and many of us fail to admit. We don't cancel because, or he didn't cancel because the job wasn't right. Kevin canceled because the fear felt too big. This is the fear of fear in its purest form. It's not the job he's afraid of. It's not the job you're afraid of. It's the feeling that you might have to walk into that room and face your fears. Fear of being judged, fear of not knowing enough, fear of a question that is going to expose your insecurity, fear of being rejected. Now that we're going to look at another candidate. We got a couple more candidates we're going to interview. Fear that your past is going to disqualify you from getting the job. But know something powerful here, right? Kevin's fear, it didn't prevent rejection. It almost guaranteed rejection. It's like 100% of the chance you won't get is the shots you don't take. If you reject yourself first, you basically eliminate yourself before you even had the chance to be evaluated. That's the trap of fear. That's the lie of fear. Fear says, I'm protecting you from disappointment. So you're not going to go. But what it's really doing is protecting you, is protecting itself from exposure. Now imagine if Kevin had gone anyway, unsure, whatever. Even, no, he was shaky. Imagine if he just told himself, yeah, I'm scared, bro. But guess what? I'm going to show up and I'm going to give my best shot. Even if he didn't get the job, he could have got experience. One of the questions that I always ask, because I've applied for jobs and stuff like that, and I had fear. I had fear that I wouldn't get the job. One of the questions, and this is a nugget I'm just going to throw into the podcast. The only way you're going to get it, maybe you saw it on the reel or if you listen to the podcast fully, but one of the questions I would ask after every interview, only because I was scared, but I was okay with my fear. I would ask the interview or whoever I was talking to, maybe it was a panel. I've been in front of panels when it comes to interview, like a couple of people interviewing at the same time. I would always ask, they always ask you that question at the end of the interviews, like, do you have any questions for us? After they grilled you, they always ask, are there any questions that you have for us? And my go-to question, I'm gonna give it to you guys. So shout me out if you've done it before or if you're going to start doing it now. At the end of at the end of every interview, I always ask this same question. Is there anything on my resume or anything on my background that you believe would not make me a good candidate for this position? Is there anything in my background on my resume that you believe would make me a poor candidate for this position? That normally puts people on the spot, but guess what? I'm putting fear on the spot because they can say, nah, ain't nothing wrong. You good. You good. Everything you have presented, it actually shows confidence when you confront fear. It shows courage. I fear that I'm not going to get the job. So I ask them, hey, look, what's on that resume? What's in my background? What do you think will prevent me from getting a job like this? And if they're honest, they'll tell you like, well, we were worried about this little background thing, or we was looking for somebody with more experience with that. And guess what? That gives me the tools to go figure it out. You gain confidence, you gain clarity, you gain strength. But of course, most of us, myself included before, I used to gain regret disguised as relief. Because let me tell you something hard, but very true. Fear makes us walk and talk ourselves out of rooms we belong in. Fear completely talk you out of a good thing. Rooms where we probably could succeed, places where we could grow, or places where we could learn, where people could see our potential. So when you allow fear to do that, you don't miss an interview. You miss an opportunity to become a better version of yourself. And I've been Kevin before. Maybe you have too. We've all had chances that intimidated us, relationships that scared us, conversations that we just didn't have. Maybe it was a class we didn't register for because we doubted that we were smart enough to be in a class, or we felt like we were too old, man. I went back to school right after I got out of prison. I jumped into a college. And it goes back to, I'm showing my age here for real right here. Back in the day, it was a movie called Back to School, where this dude, forgot the actor's name. I think it's Rodney Dangerfield. He went back to school, but he was like 60 years old. Now, I wasn't 60 when I went back to school, but you get what I'm saying. I was a little bit older than the people that I was in the class with. We've all been there. We've all canceled something out of fear and then lied about it to preserve our pride. Right? We got to stop shrinking. We got to stop shrinking to match our comfort zone. Because fear will have you choosing small opportunities because the big ones, they're going to require you to get outside of the box. So instead of getting outside of the box, you kind of, I'm just going to stay, I'm going to get small, like in this little box that I love this box. So with that being said, that's just a Kevin. I use that as an analogy. It's not something that we haven't confronted before. Kevin's story is a mirror, not just a moment on a podcast. Many of us did that stuff. So you need to ask yourself, like, what interview have you canceled, literally or figuratively? What chance did you get to talk to somebody that you canceled because you were afraid? What chance did you walk away from because fear convinced you weren't ready? Right? There are a lot of doors that are closed before we even check whether the door was open. Because the real lesson is it doesn't always roar. Fear sometimes whispers. That whisper is often more dangerous than a shout. Right? We don't fail. Sometimes we don't even try because of fear. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and start facing the fear. How do you overcome that? How do you get the courage to stop running? Because this is where the real transformation starts. When you stop running, not when you read about fear or hear about it, not when you analyze it or pretend that it doesn't exist anymore. Transformation really starts the moment you decide that you're not running anymore. See, most people think fear goes away with time. Like once you get a little bit older, a little bit wiser, you get a little bit more gray hair, you get a little bit more settled, fear somehow just going to dissolve. Just like, I've seen it all, done it all. But you and I both know that's not true. Fear doesn't evaporate. It doesn't have an expiration date or retirement date. It just waits. It adapts. It finds new ways to slip into your life, right? It don't just live in dark alleys or dangerous places. It lives in new opportunities. When new responsibilities show up, in moments where the next step is bigger than anything you've ever done before, that's when fear shows up. You think fear only visits you when something bad is happening, don't you? Right? Fear will visit you when good things start happening too. We don't talk about this enough. We have all these shows, these podcasts about reentry and life after prison and all this other good stuff. But how many of them talk about fear? Sometimes we fear success just as much as we fear failure. We fear being seen just as much as being ignored. Because sometimes the fear that we get into, just because we get in that job, we're responsible, we start fearing that we can't keep it. Starting over because we don't trust ourselves not to mess a good thing up. So we'll leave it. I just do that in my relationships, man. Things be going good. Things will be going really well, bro. And then that fear creep in. It's like, man, you ain't gonna be able to maintain this, bro. You're not gonna be able to maintain this relationship. She got goals. You got goals, but you're afraid of your goals. So how you gonna keep her? How you gonna keep maintaining? Now I can mask it with confidence, right? I can mask it with like this fake confidence, not true confidence, fake confidence. Because what I realized, and many of us have known over the years, especially if you're listening to this podcast right now, fear can show up anytime the next version of you demands more from the current version of you. Think about that. It'll show up anytime the next version of you requires more than who you are right now. You're like, man, I'm good where I'm at. And this personally, from my own journey, man, from incarceration to reentry to rebuilding my life, I found fear will follow you into freedom if you don't confront it while you're still in captivity. So I got all that stuff out the way while I was in prison. That's the bravado stuff, not just the fake confidence, like, oh no, you ain't gonna take shit from me. Not that type of fear, because that wasn't gonna happen anyway. I'll pretty much hard on that part. But that part about, hey, in those classes, in recovery, in therapy, talking to counselors, talking to some of my brothers that were on the same path, we were confronted, like, what are you gonna do if you go apply for a job and they bring up your felony? What are you going to do? What are you going to do if your kid comes up to you and they ask where you been all these years? We start confronting those things now. So you got to start confronting that fear, because that fear will follow you even on the outside. If you're dealing with it right now, if you're already outside, you hopefully you have come to the point where you realize, like, hey, I need to confront this, or you have confronted. I have no idea. There's a large demographic of listeners on this show, people that have been in, people that are out, some people that are still in, right? They hear the podcast, or people send them transcripts of the podcast. So, but you have to confront this while you're still in captivity. In captivity, I'm not talking about just physical captivity. I'm talking about the mental captivity. You can be out here right now and still in jail. You still allowing fear to follow you or to direct your every move. It ain't physical. It's a mental, emotional, sometimes a spiritual captivity. Because you can walk out of prison and still be locked inside old fears that you have carried for years, decades even. You can get a new job, but hell, you can still fear losing it. You can get a relationship, but you can still feel being abandoned because you're not used to it. You can start a whole business, but you can fear failing publicly. Fear has a long memory, and it will use every trace of your old life to sabotage your new life if you don't confront it. But here's the part most people never expect. Facing fear doesn't require you to be fearless. It just requires you to be honest. It just requires you to be honest. It's okay to say, I don't know what I'm doing. You don't need to bulldoze fear or ignore it or pretend you don't even feel it. You don't even need to master it in every situation. You just need to be able to admit that, hey, I'm scared, but I'm going to move anyway. That, my friends, is courage. Courage ain't loud. Courage don't have to be dramatic and not a superhero moment. You got an S on your chest and you say it ain't got to be all that. It's just small, steady, and very much intentional. Let me tell you what courage looks like. Courage looks like, showing up to the interview even when your stomach in knots. You throw it up. You're nervous. Your fingers sweaty. Your palms sweaty, but you show up anyway. Courage comes like if you make a phone call that you've been trying to avoid. Maybe it's to your kids that you ain't talked to them. Maybe it's to your parents, to your mom or dad, whatever. You can go ahead and make the phone call anyway. One of the fears I had was like enrolling in a class, right? I doubted myself like a mother, but I enrolled in it anyway. Maybe your fear is showing up, or the courage that you have, I should say, courage, because that's what we're talking about now. Courage shows up when you're vulnerable in a relationship, but it scares you, but you're there anyway. You can, I mean, sometimes it's like just asking for help, man, even when you just want to be quiet. That's what courage is. It's quiet. It's not the absence of fear. It's just the refusal to let fear choose your life for you. Now, a lot of returning citizens struggling with this more than they admit, but whether you were locked up for a year or 20 years or 50 years, you were conditioned to suppress fear, to numb it, to armor up. But now you're home, on the way home, or been home for a while. You're building something new, and that armor that once protected you, sir, ma'am, it might not be what's holding you back. Facing fear means retraining your nervous system, retraining your mindset, your spirit, just to understand that fear is information, not intimidation. Fear is that information that, hey, look, I need to become more confident in this area. Let me go educate myself. I need to be able to deal with any impromptu questions they might throw me. Let me go prepare myself. You're stepping into something unfamiliar. Okay. What fear doesn't do, it doesn't say like turn around or give up or you're not good enough. It don't say that. It don't say that. That's what it's not gonna say. It's gonna say, like, you don't belong here. These are the lies we attach to fear. These are the stories fear never actually wrote. We end up believing that stuff. And the truth is, fear, it'll start to shrink if you just start stepping towards it. It ain't really hard. I know when you listen to this podcast, like, oh, you're just giving us another motivational speech, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you through learned experience, it's about being able to confront things that have been holding you back, things that actually direct you subconsciously. And fear is one of them. A lack of effort is one of them. We talked about that on the other podcast. You just don't want to try because you think you're going to fail. Fear is the driving force behind lack of effort. When you feel like you can't do it, it's some subconscious so deep rooted inside of you that you don't move because you think you're going to fail. Every action you take will chip away at the power fear once had over you. If it's been loud in your life, just ask yourself, man, when was the last time you actually challenged fear? Because it doesn't back down from avoidance. It just backs down from motion. You got to face it, name it, confront it, and take the small steps in its direction to overcome fear. And then watch how quickly fear realize that it doesn't own you anymore. Okay? Now, let's get into the work, man. Let's get into the work. The work that will basically cover this last remaining segment. It's about that the kind of work that doesn't happen in a classroom, a workbook, or a group session, but inside your own mind, where nobody's looking and nobody's grading you. This is where that transformation begins. We talk about it a lot. It's in those quiet places where fear once called all the shots. It was the shot caller in your life. Let's talk about those decisions that were influenced by fear, because it isn't just an emotion, it's a driver. It steers, it directs, it whispers in your ear like it's trying to protect you when really it's just limiting you. And unless you purposefully take the steering wheel back, fear will continue to guide you while convincing you that you are in control. So this is what I want you to do, because I'm not here just to um I guess I am here to expose. I really want you to dig, to excavate, to sit with the moments in your life where fear stepped in and made choices for you. Choices that you later look back on and thought, man, if only I had moved differently. So write this down. Write these questions down. Replay the podcast or whatever. But you can start this work by asking a few simple questions. They're all in the book, Turning Forward, available on Amazon. It's part of the workbook series or the workbook chapters, that I put into, I think the best work I've had so far. Sometimes I went back and read that book. I was like, it's okay for me to do these exercises again. And one of the questions that I want you guys to do moving into the next week is to ask yourself and then write it down. Write it down so you can visibly see it, right? Write it down, take a break from it, and then come back a week or two later and read it again. But the first question is, where has fear shown up in my life disguised as something else? Whether that's anger, whether it's avoidance, where has it shown up? Where has fear shown up in your life disguised as something else? Because fear rarely walks in the front door and now says, "Hey, I'm fear." It kind of sneaks in wearing like a whole different drip, right? It sometimes comes as anger, disinterest, pride, aggression. So again, the question is, where has fear crept in, but it appeared to be something different? Maybe it was silence, laziness, overthinking. Overthinking. That was one big one for me. Fear was always overthinking because I kept overthinking stuff because every scenario I came up with, fear would say, that ain't gonna work. But what if this happened? I'm like, okay, if that happened, then I'm just gonna do this, and another. Then okay, so if you're gonna do this, let's open up. It's like a rabbit hole, you know. So where in your life did fear show up as something else? Maybe it was avoidance, because sometimes fear even shows up as something that makes perfect sense, right? It might say something like, "Man, that's not the right time. You don't need to. You're not financially ready to start no business." You know, you can start things when this other area in your life calm down. Don't do it right now because you got other stuff. Don't even go for the opportunity because you got other stuff going on. Just wait for the perfect moment. But how many perfect moments never come because of fear? Fear just needed the excuse. Right? It just needed an excuse. So think about your younger years, maybe before prison, during prison, or after prison. How many times did you choose something smaller, safer, or something you were more comfortable with, or even destructive because fear told you it was the best option? How many times that happened? That you might have chose something destructive because fear told you it was the best option. Now, my best option in that poker game was to slap the shit out of dude because I did not want fear to be exposed, like people looking at me like they could take something from me. Right? Maybe fear told you don't trust. You'll get hurt. Or don't open up. They won't understand you. Right? Think about that. So while you're writing those exercises out, man, let the first writing be the first boundary you take care of before the end of this year. Fear has had a long voice in your life, but it doesn't need to have the final word. Take your time with this assignment. Like, just think about it. Get real, raw, get uncomfortable, because discomfort is where the new version of you begins. That's where transformation happens. That's where rewriting the narrative happens. And let me leave you with this: fear cannot be defeated by avoidance. You can't keep avoiding stuff, right? That's what it wants you to believe. It can only be defeated by understanding. When you understand your fear, you rob it of its authority. When you name it, when you face it, you free yourself from it. So sit down, just answer those questions, rewrite your story one page at a time. Rewrite your story. Now, it's not gonna go away. Fear is part of being human, man. And ladies, for the ladies that are listening, this is part of being human. But living your entire life in reaction to fear, that's an option you choose. That's the part you get to change. You survived harder things than the fear you're running from right now. So just realize, like, you lived through some storms that should have taken you out. I know I have some storms that should have took me out. And so don't let the little voice of doubt, of fear, stop you from taking the next step. Name it, face it, and take back the power you've been given. This fear over the years, right? We're here to heal. We're here to grow, to rewrite the stories that most times fear has wrote for us. So until next time, fam, keep changing the narrative.